And so kind of went over the preparation for writing an offer, everything that needs to be done ahead of time before you sit down to write the offer. The last few times I've done the contract class, I've gone over the terms of the contract and things, the obligations and rights that the parties get to in the contract that they are signing up for. So that's already, uploaded, and that those are videos that you can access and should access in Digital Chalk. And so today, I haven't done this in a while, so today I'm going to be going over actually the mechanics of filling in the contract itself. Um, when we're doing the contracts challenge or when you're doing practice contracts, just not that we don't want you to know the contract, what the contract says, because that's vitally important, but just filling out the blanks. Because, as Vicky came through class with me, but I make a big deal about, as I should, because that's what the states say, that we're not attorneys and we don't write contracts. We fill in blanks on contracts. Right? Someone signing in, two people. Martha and Tamisha,
Good
both
morning.
joining us here. Good morning, Martha and Tamisha. So, um, probably a few more people will filter in too. So, as I was just saying, today we're going to be going over just actually the mechanics of filling in the contract, the filling in the blanks, because that's all we can do. I see a lot of contracts coming into the office, and some of our agents, not necessarily launch agents, but trying to be, kind of putting on their attorney hat and trying to make a lot of things a lot more complicated than they really should be. The whole point of the contract itself is to make things as clear as possible, as black and white as possible. So today we're just going to be going over the mechanics of filling in the contract. And I pulled in also, so I guess I'll just start sharing screen here, try to watch for people as they come on. I think I turned my phone off. Hold on. Good. Oh, and here comes someone else. Elena's coming in here also. All right, so I'm going to share screen. And again, this is not a dot loop class. Oh, but I had dot loop on here. Here we go. Oh, one thing I didn't do was go ahead and pull in Matrix as well. So let me get logged on there. You all get to see me do my administrative stuff here for just a second. Because I'm going to pull in we're going to pretend that we're still working on, as I did on Monday, on the contracts class or the contract challenge property. Oop, not going to let me do that because it is still active. Those of you, oh, and here comes Jocelyn. Those of you that have written a contract, well, I don't think that's anybody for the contract challenge. I don't think that's anybody in here this morning. Um, I hope you went to see it. Those of you that participate in Wednesday Night Warriors probably went to see the property a couple of weeks ago for contract challenge. I hope everybody here, and I know that Vicky's already answered that she'll just be joining tonight via Zoom, but I hope everyone that can make it comes to the launch celebration tonight. We're going to do a very abbreviated contracts challenge presentation, just because everybody, I do have a few offers in. and everyone worked really hard on those. So we're going to do that. And I never did change up the schedule to try to get everybody in last week. So we're going to do a very abbreviated contract challenge presentation at the very beginning tonight, but then a celebration of everyone's year. Those of most of you have just joined in the last, a lot of you just in the last few months, but in the last year or so. And so a celebration of all of you, all of the hard work that you've all put in. So I hope everyone that can make it tonight makes it. And as I said, we'll be going over just briefly the contracts that came in. We're not going to go through the contracts as we normally do. I'm just going to present what we have, the terms of what we have, so that we can kind of choose the winner that way. All right, so I've pulled up here in MLS. So basically we've answered all of the questions. We've gotten all of the answers from the buyers that we talked about on Monday. And so I'm going to then write the contract based on that. We're going to be writing the contract on this property. So just the mechanics of filling in the contract itself. So I pulled in a couple of other things here. It didn't pertain to this particular property, but just to let you all know, the seller's disclosure and the lead-based paint disclosure, the seller's disclosure should always be in MLS. And again, to show everyone where we find those things here on this is the property we're going to be writing the offer on. And so here we go to the view documents, clickable link there, and he has them separated out here as the disclosure. So that's the seller's disclosure and the lead-based paint. So a couple of things on here, and since I don't have anybody here that actually wrote the contract, I try to every month on the contracts challenge. My criteria is that I want to choose a vacant house because when we go see it, we don't want to actually be kicking people out of their house, thinking that they've got an actual showing. And so it has to be vacant. I try to make it close to the office, just because, if any other part of town, I know that I've got people coming from all parts of town. I want to make it real easy. And then for the Wednesday Night Warriors to go see it, on the second Wednesday of the month. And then usually I try to find some kind of little trick to it, something that's would make it an unusual offer. This month, I didn't think that I did that because everything that met a house that met all of my other criteria was an in-house listing listed by Warren Smith here in the office and in our brokerage. And Warren is just one of those people that, dots every I and crosses every T. And he has been a broker in the past. He was broker actually for our brokerage many, many years ago as the brokerage was kind of starting up. But so super smart guy, really great resource for all of you. Most of the time he comes by my classes. Vicki and Martha both came through class with me out of this group that's here with me this morning. And so I don't remember if Warren came by and introduced himself necessarily to your classes, but really great resource in the office. He's actually home. He's not in the office here for a few weeks because he's home with a broken leg. Has to stay off of that leg for several weeks. I think through March, maybe at least through February. He broke it on Christmas Day. What a great way to celebrate. But so I really thought, well, this is going to be a good clean one. With no tricks in it, but it met all of my other criteria. But it did turn out that on his seller's disclosure, and I was so super surprised by this, and no one that has written a contract for the contract challenge caught it either. But you'll see. So I thought, the sellers did a great job of filling it out, everything in the seller's disclosure here. So again, I'm kind of going through the process of writing the offer. So I'm looking at the seller's disclosure. They initialed every page, excuse me, filled in, whenever they had an answer, did a great job of filling in our uh, utility information here, did a great job in filling in the page 7 about the systems and the personal property, whether that's staying or not. Oh, they do have it signed. Okay. Someone must have pointed that out to Warren. because they didn't have it signed. Okay, so now I need to, back up. This was not signed to begin with, so someone must have pointed that out to Warren at some point. But so you'll pull this over into your loop, because this does become part of the contract. It is a pre-printed addenda in the contract. So, and this is a notification of, this has been something that we've talked about. Again, we've talked about the estimated proceeds worksheet and estimated cost worksheet and business meeting over the last several weeks. And also the seller's disclosure kind of became a big thing in Tuesdays. If you haven't watched Tuesdays, if you please do that. I think those are still available for you to watch on Facebook. Maybe not. So this becomes a very important part of our contract. If there is not one, you need to ask for it. If there's something missing or wrong on this, wrong meaning that it's not signed or there's an initial missing from the seller, we have to address that in the contract. You should probably address it in your conversation with the listing agent, but you do have to address it with the contract. But you'll pull this over. And so because you need to assign your buyers initials and signatures on each page. And this is not a dot loop class. So watch your dot loop trainings and talk to Brett if you're not sure how to get the buyer's initial boxes on there or signature boxes. But so buyer's initials on every page of the seller's disclosure and buyer's signatures on the bottom of this. That's their acknowledgement that they have received it and read it. I do have a lead-based paint pulled over into the loop that we're going to be working with this morning. And it's the 2026. So because this property went on the market, he listed it back in December when the forms were available and went on the market the 2nd of January. So he used the new 2026 version of the lead-based paint. So we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. But all of that's filled out properly as it should be. So you're checking on that. And back in and the documents here, there's nothing else that needs to go in our contract here. The paid invoices that are here, that's great information for us to have. Looking through that seller's disclosure, they've just had a new roof put on. They had it says had the house rewired. And so they have provided the invoices, number one, that's proof that the work was done and that they were paid. A paid invoice, anytime we have work that's recently been done on the property, whether it is done just as they go on the market, and such as in this case, or if it's something that we're asking for in our resolution of unacceptable conditions in our renegotiation period, we want paid invoices. Sorry. Dry air just really does a number on me. So the reason we want paid invoices is because the title company will want to make sure that everything has been paid for. We don't want any possible mechanics liens coming in last minute on the property or after the property closes. So we want evidence. If there was work done, we want evidence that it was paid for also. And so we have our electrical invoice there. Bordner was the roofer. And I think that was all that was in here. Oh, that's right. The HVAC system. All right. So those don't become part of the contract. It's just really great information for us to have. Those remain. I pull those over into your loop too, but and make sure that your buyer receives a copy of that if we end up with the contract. They don't need it if our offer is not ever accepted, but they will need them if they become the new owners of the property. And then a lot of agents will also then put in, which Warren does also on all of his listings, offer instructions. Look at this. All offers must include proof of funds or pre-approval letter, the marital status of the buyers. We'll talk about that when we get to the contract. Initial and sign all applicable disclosures and addenda. You should know better that there's no such word as addendums. And the buyer's title company information, if it's different than what the seller uses. We can always have a split closing, unless it's a cash offer, if our buyer's paying cash, we have to use the same title company that the seller uses. But otherwise, the buyer can use their own title company. Sometimes it's easier to use who the seller is using, especially if it's a reputable title company. And we'll kind of talk about that at some point too. I know there's a whole launch class about title and what all of that means and splitting the closings and all of that, but it's perfectly okay for the buyer to choose their own title company to close with. All of the title work is going to be done with the seller's title company, but your buyer can choose to close with a different title company. And then he fills this one in, as most agents do, specifically for this listing, how he wants the seller's names on all of the documents that we prepare, the correct property address here, and then who the seller has chosen as their title company. And not only is the title company listed here, but also the closing agent here. And so if our buyer is going to be choosing a different title company, he asks that we fill this in and send that along with the offer. Doesn't become part of the offer, nor does the pre-approval letter or proof of funds, but things that we would be sending that, and a lot of agents do out there in the world do provide something like this in the MLS documents. So if that's the case, pull that over again, keep it in your loop. If it's something that you're filling out to present to the listing agent, send it to them, but it doesn't become part of our contract. So there's that. So we've got all of that. I'm going to close that out, but I'm going to keep that listing open because we'll need it. Okay, so back over here in Dotloop. So I've pulled in both of the versions of the real estate sale contract, the residential version of it. When you're in the KCRAR template folder, make sure you're pulling over the correct one because there is a sale contract for land. There's a sale contract for new construction, new home construction. So make sure you're pulling over the correct one. All of the contract forms are going to be in the KCRAR template folder because that's part of our agreement with MLS is that we're all going to use the same contract. You will occasionally, when you're receiving an offer on a listing, you'll occasionally see that there are some brokers out there that brand the contract to their brokerage. They will put their logo up in the top left-hand corner of the contract, but the contract cannot be changed. That's part of our agreement. So that way I don't have to worry about Reese Nichols contract coming in that's different than the one I'm used to seeing. So we all agree to use the same contract. All right, so make sure you're pulling over the one for residential. I have both versions of it in here. I've got the one with calculations and the one without calculations. It doesn't do you a whole lot of good to do the one with calculations over the without. There's that one place where it does help a little bit. And so that's the one I'm going to pull up and I'll point that out to you as we get there. But I also like to say, well, also possibly when you're writing an offer, it didn't pertain to this one, but possibly when you're writing an offer, the listing broker or listing agent is going to have their affiliated business and or franchise agreement in there. And so I have this one in the loop just as an example here. So most of the REMAX offices will have you have this as part of the MLS documents. When you see that in there, that does mean that they are asking for your buyer to acknowledge this, sign it and acknowledge it, and it does become part of the offer. So I'm going to use this one as an example, just to show you where it goes on the contract, even though it doesn't really apply on this particular house. I hope that makes sense. So you'll see that it's filled in. You will insert your buyer's name again through Dotloop, adding the buyer's name in there as text, and then applying your buyer's signature boxes down here and assigning those to your buyer. All right, so So in our loop, then we're going to have the contract, the lead-based paint, if it applies, the seller's disclosure, and then any other documents. There may be other addenda in there, especially as we are in this time of year. Well, now I can't even say that anymore because it's all part of the seller's disclosure now. So the seller's disclosure has updated just a little bit, and so I didn't pull that over. We're going to have a whole class on the seller's disclosure and uh, how that applies to our listings. So be prepared for that. Next month, we will be talking about listings, going through the listing agreement and going through the buyer agency agreement. So we'll talk about the seller's disclosure when we get to that next month. So I didn't pull it over because it's a little confusing. And Jeff is here again. All right, so we've got all of these things in our loop that we're going to need to address in some way. So I'm going to use the with calculations. I don't use autofill. I know that your coaches kind of coach you to, and there's nothing wrong with that. I prefer that you not use it if you're presenting an offer for the contracts challenge just because pulling over that information can kind of tends to kind of merge some loops between two different two different agents. So I don't use it, but feel free to if you want to, because I know your coaches coach you to do that. So the seller's name. So once again, we find that back here. In our offer instructions, this agent, Warren, has put how he wants the seller's name on all of our documents. So that's the first place that you would go look for the seller's name. Second place that you would go look for the seller's name if the listing agent does not have the offer instructions are, should have closed that out, whatever is written on the seller's disclosure or anything else that the seller has provided as a document here, as an addenda here. And this one, because do you like this too? What did was the only thing that Warren touched on this form was he filled in the property address. He let the sellers put in their own names. I would suggest maybe that you put in the seller's name and the address, but then that's all we can do. We cannot touch this form other than that. All has to be done by the seller. So this one is readable, right? We've got Diane E. Smith and Eric L. Smith and husband and wife or a married couple. So we've got that there. If for some reason there is not a seller's disclosure, and we'll talk about that too, but if there's not a seller's disclosure, the last and final place where you would go to get the seller's name is in the tax record. So either here in this tab or down here in the real list tax down here, but here on this tab. And if you pull from here, make sure, see, because, and here's a great example here, because they were not a married couple when they bought the property. So we have two different names here. And she has now signed everything as Diane E. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. We have Ralph Smith on there also. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, all right. So we have that situation. We have Eaton and Smith here. So verify with the listing agent if you're going to pull from the tax records. If it's not available on a listing agent's offer instructions or on some other addenda that the sellers provided their name at the top, then always double check with the listing agent. That's really not only does it apply in a situation like this, but it also applies when maybe a property has just been rehabbed and the tax records haven't completely updated. So lots of reasons to check with the listing agent. That would be one of them. Going back to our conversation from Monday when you're asking the listing agent about any questions that you have. All right, so we put in our seller's name here. we put in our buyer's name here. The edit text pops up here because you're not typing directly on this form. There's a pop-up box that shows up just so I can show you that. Okay, so that you're entering the text here, right, and then saving it. Most other boxes don't have that. It's just that they've done that to the name here. If it's a bank-owned property, you would check this box. At foreclosure, you will get all kinds of notifications. You'll have all kinds of clues if it's a foreclosed property. No indication of that. This is privately owned, so we don't check that here. If improvements on the property include a manufactured or mobile home, you would check that box. The reason being because we have to have evidence that the property has been permanently attached to the land, that improvement has been permanently attached to the land. Otherwise, we probably can't get a loan on it, and it's taxed differently. So that's really important. Doesn't apply to this property. Unless you're out working in rural areas, that's not really going to apply. There are some parts of town where we do have the manufactured homes that have been brought in and built on property, in pieces, kind of like a Lego home or something like that. But those have been permanently attached for the most part. So that there are those unusual situations, but most of the time you're not going to be dealing with that. We fill in the street address here. The common street address is absolutely fine for this. In fact, that's what they're asking for here. But make sure that you put in the complete address, house number, street name, city, state, and zip code. And then also be sure to include the county where the property is located here on line 23. Then we have our legal description. Back here on the tax records, there are two places you can get legal description. Back here on the tax records, down here in tax information, you can copy and paste from right here. This should be a complete legal description. Some agents actually put in the legal description addenda in the miscellaneous documents or the MLS documents. So feel free, if they've done that, you need to use that. But for the most part, again, working in suburban America, suburban Kansas City here is going to be a lot in block or at least a short version of anything else that we might have. So you can copy and paste there. The other place that you can find it is here on MLS. Legal descriptions up here in this top paragraph here. So legal description, LGL, stands for legal, so you can copy and paste from there. So we have to have that filled in. Once again, our MLS rules require that. Then we get down to, where do I want to put this? Yeah, I think I'll keep you down at the bottom here. So, all right, so we have here this paragraph and the list here on lines 46 through 51 are exactly the same as they are on the seller's disclosure. The paragraph states that the seller's disclosure is what governs unless we make a change here that the both parties agree to on the contract. But as far as what the seller says on page 7 of the seller's disclosure remains with the property and operating condition and all of that. This list here is exactly the same as it is on our seller's disclosure. Again, I want you all to memorize this list because these are things that you should be walking as you're walking through the property. Either in a listing, you're going to be talking with the seller about it, or when you're showing the property to a buyer, you're going to be talking to the buyer about it. All of these things. How would you feel if if any of these things were gone? Then the other on the next page, on page 2, need to point out too, you also assign your buyer's initials here on the bottom right-hand corner of every page of the contract. All right, so we have 3 paragraphs here, paragraph 1B, 1C, and 1D. 1B are additional inclusions, anything that the buyer wants that either the seller didn't address on page 7 or that we want to change what the seller said on page 7. On this seller's disclosure, there was no refrigerator that was with the property. So we can't ask for one. That's not an inclusion here, but they did say that the washer and dryer were operating and staying. If our buyer does not want those, then we address that as an exclusion here in paragraph 1C. seller to remove existing washer and dryer. All right. But anything, so, lots of conversation about what we put in inclusions. If walking through the property, we did see a refrigerator there and the buyer wanted it, that's one thing that we can add on here. Please, please, please do not start adding anything other than the refrigerator or washer and dryer. Anything else needs to go on a bill of sale and separate from here. Tell your buyer if they're walking through and they really want that pool table or they really want that entertainment center, tell them, that's great. We'll talk about that later. Let's talk about the house first. Don't worry about that until we know we've got the house. Don't let anything about the negotiations on that stuff squirrel our negotiations on the house and the land. So, all right, so additional inclusions and exclusions, you will occasionally run across that. We're not on this particular offer here. Any additional terms and conditions. So Warren just kind of messed me up because I was going to point out that at one time, there were no signatures on the seller's disclosure. I would talk with him about that prior to when I call him, and maybe by the time that I'm sitting down to write the offer, he will have provided a signed one for me. But the one that and said, "Oh gosh, yeah, sorry, didn't notice that. I'm going to have the seller sign that. I'll get that right over to you." Then we would not address it here. But otherwise, I would put that in additional terms and conditions. We only use this box, and you'll see how small this box is when something is not addressed anywhere else in the contract. So, I see people trying to put things in here, seller paid closing costs and that kind of thing. No, we don't put that in here because that's addressed elsewhere. So, the only thing that we put in here is something that is not addressed elsewhere in the contract. So, I would write something like seller to provide a signed seller's disclosure within 24 hours of effective date of the contract. Or if we're missing the lead-based paint, that's where we would put that in here. We have to have a lead-based paint. And I would make it contingent upon seller providing a completed and signed seller's disclosure or lead-based paint within 24 hours. So then other things that we might put in here would be if we knew we were in competition writing an offer here, we might offer to pay some of the seller's closing costs or something along those lines. So those are again, short, sweet, and simple. And here you'll see that it's a small box. So we're not attorneys. We want to make it as clear as possible, short, sweet, and simple. We have to address something on either line 83 or 85 here. We have to check one of those two boxes. Either the buyer's waiving the opportunity for a home warranty completely, or on line 85, they are wanting a home warranty. And again, negotiating tool here. On this particular property, I'm not sure that one's necessary. It's been rewired. The HVAC system's new. Even though the roof's not covered in a home warranty, the roof is new. So a lot of new stuff in here. And so I'm not sure that a home warranty is necessary. So negotiating tool, I would check, nope, buyer waives the opportunity for a home warranty. If it was an old HVAC system or an old water heater, or the wiring system hadn't been updated or the plumbing system hadn't been updated in many years, that's when you do start thinking about whether the buyer wants a home warranty or not. And if you're asking the seller to provide one, that's going to come off, from that is something that the seller will be paying for at closing. So if you're asking them to pay $800 for the home warranty, keep that in mind. That's going to affect their net proceeds at the bottom. So negotiating tool there. So, but also the buyer can buy one for themselves. So that's what we address on line 85. Yes, we're going to get one, but the buyer's going to be paying for it themselves. And the reason that we would have that here in the contract is, again, that becomes information that the title company needs. All of this will be reflected on the closing statement. anyone paying for the home warranty, one of the few things that we can defer to closing, because it doesn't go into effect until closing, would go into effect for the buyer on closing day. And so we can pay for it on closing day regardless of who's paying for it. But you put in the information here where you're getting the home warranty and what that particular home warranty's cost is up here, and then what the per claim deductible is, or the service fee, however it's named on the home warranty brochure. Then line 91, if we are saying that the buyer's getting a home warranty, regardless of who's paying for it, we do then also designate who's going to be in charge of ordering that, either the licensee assisting the seller or the licensee assisting the buyer. Regardless of whether you're asking the seller to pay for it or the buyer's going to be paying for it themselves, my suggestion to you is always check that you will be the one ordering and the plan and making sure the title company gets it. So you check the box licensee assisting the buyer. And the reason I suggest that is because that way you know it's done. If you're leaving something, don't put something on the other party. Number one, you're not sure it's going to get done, and that's just something you're going to have to follow up on anyway. So just just as a courtesy, take on what you should take on. Then we get down here to the addenda. Seller's disclosure and condition of property addendum. It is there and now completely filled in, so we would check that. 99.9% of the time, you are going to have the seller's disclosure there. If there's not one, be sure and ask for one. But the only time you're not going to get one is on a foreclosure property, that you can't insist upon getting one, is on a foreclosure property. And even then, a lot of banks will provide one. It's not going to look like ours, but it will be a version of a seller's disclosure, so you would check that. But that's the only time. Otherwise, if there's not one at all, we have to address that up here in the additional terms and conditions. The
Excuse me,
buyer and
Linda.
seller, uh-huh.
Is that the same rule on commercial property?
We don't, no, because we don't have one on commercial property. There's not a seller's disclosure for,
Okay.
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 All
Okay.
right. Good question. All right. So if there's not one, we have to address that up here in additional terms and conditions. That's buyer and seller acknowledge that there is not a completed and signed seller's disclosure. Lead-based paint, when it applies, property built before 1978, we would check that box. That is a federal requirement. We have to have that on every property built before 1978. So again, if there is not one, have that conversation with the listing agent, but then also put up here an additional terms and conditions. Then other things that we would include here, if your buyer is making this offer contingent upon selling and closing on their own current property, we would have that, different forms required on that. I think we talked about that when I did the miscellaneous documents last week. Hope I did. The other here, and you'll see there are lots of other ones here. If the property's on a septic system, there's a special addenda for that. That was the one I didn't get to with last week when I was doing miscellaneous documents. So I do like to kind of talk about that. I hope that Megan talked about that at Wednesday Night Warriors last week. Um, but on this one, this is where we would put that Remax, if this were a Remax listing, that Remax affiliated business franchise agreement. And so you would click the box and name it here. So again, whatever makes it clear, you can put abbreviations in here. So I would write Remax and then affiliated business, AFF.BUS, and then slash franchise or FRANCH is fine, as long as it makes it clear what we're talking about there. If you were writing this with an in its present condition added to it, it would be other and then the in its present condition. If you were writing this with uh, and then you have as many as you want to. If we have the in its present condition there, and then we're also putting that appraisal contingency waiver that we talked about last week. So you can put as many in here as you want. The things that do not count as addenda, pre-approval does not. Proof of funds does not. The offer instructions do not. But anything that is an acknowledgement between the two parties then goes on here. And that list. Buyer initials, that page. I'll point out here, one of the little cheats that you have on our KCRAR forms is that the contract is up in the top right-hand corner. If there's a gray triangle up there, then that means there's something on that page that you need to address. Page 3, a lot of things on here, a lot of definitions. I think that they should put the gray triangle up on this page too, because if we were related to either party, or if we were ourselves a party to the contract, we have to address these two paragraphs down here. Seller and or buyer is a licensed real estate broker or salesperson. If it's your house that you're selling, then you would be checking the box on line 137. If you are the buyer buying a property, you would check the box on line 138. Check the appropriate boxes if you're licensed in both Kansas and Missouri. If you're licensed in any other state, make that declaration there also. If you are related to either party in the contract, you're addressing the lines on the boxes on lines 140 and 142. If you're related to either party of the contract, state license law in both states require those disclosures. Here we are on page 4, paragraph 4. So we put our purchase price here, what the buyer is offering, goes on line 164. Line 167 here, again, not that not every paragraph is important because they all are important, but as we start talking about earnest money has become something that sellers really are starting. And I don't want to say they're a requirement for a contract. Earnest money is not a requirement for a valid contract, but most sellers require some kind of earnest deposit or that it's addressed in some way before they will seriously consider an offer. So anything having to do with earnest money here. And this is one of those things that, one of Linda's little hot buttons here is that if there's a blank with a default behind it, such as this one on line 168, earnest money will be delivered to the licensee assisting the seller or their escrow agent within blank calendar days. And we have the default here of 3 days. There are times when you might want to lengthen that. If the buyer doesn't have their money immediately available. And there are situations in which this is a legitimate thing to do. Then you would change the number of days here. If anything is written in here that's different than our default, then both parties have to agree to it. It could be a term that is negotiated. If your buyer says, well, I don't have money available right away, it will take me a few days to get that out of, wherever it is. I would like 5 days for that. And the reason that we address it is because if it is not there in a timely manner, and as we get down to 172, if earnest money is not delivered during the delivery period, seller may cancel this contract by written notice once the delivery period is ended and prior to delivery of the earnest money. So if we know that the buyer can't get the earnest money there within 3 days of the effective date of the contract, their buyer is at risk. Their money's not at risk yet because it hasn't been delivered, but the buyer is at risk, the contract is at risk. So address that. Then again, Linda's little hot button. If you're not going to change that, don't put anything in there. If you're good with the 3 days, leave it blank. And because again, Linda's little hot button is, I know that some agents will, because they think they're doing, their diligent work here and they're going to put the 3 in there. If I see a 3 in there, I've got 2 thoughts. Number 1, did you mean to put something else in there and it was a mindless 3 that you put in there? Or are you going to address every blank in the contract? And that becomes important later on. So if you're leaving it at 3, just leave it blank. Linda's hot button. There's nothing wrong with putting the 3 in there other than it just bothers Linda a lot. Oh, I also want to point out too, So our property was on the market for 320. Please put in your commas, separating your thousands, and also put in your cents. The cents are always going to be zero. Please don't start working with cents on the contract, but and I'll show you why later. So this is our offer price, let's say. As we then, I'll go ahead and fill in this page. Hold on. It didn't take. Okay, 1% of the earnest money will pretend. Make sure that you are checking all of these boxes here. What the form of the earnest deposit is, check electronic funds transfer, ACH. Most of the time it's going to be that box that you're checking. Please fill in deposited with here, and where we find that, I know I tell everybody because this is one that's missed quite often here. You find that down here and the close to the bottom right-hand corner down here, earnest deposit, and then this will tell you. Most of the time it's going to be a title company. You all learned in pre-license class that the broker keeps the earnest money, but in real life, most brokers have turned that over to a title company. So our title company is our escrow holder for the most part here. So Platinum Title. So we type in Platinum Title here. And it's important to put that in there. And then on line 181, check refundable, especially on again, 99.9% of the time, we want that refundable. That's what protects your buyer. It's refundable per the terms of the contract. Every so often, you will find a situation in which the earnest money will be non-refundable. Most of the time, that's going to be in new construction. A builder will make the earnest deposit non-refundable, but always ask for it to be refundable to begin with. And especially if if it's brand new construction, a custom built property, then it's non-negotiable that it's going to be non-refundable. If it's a house that's already built and the builder's not going to be making any adjustments or changes to the property based upon the buyer's preferences, then it really can be, and should be refundable. So always check refundable here, and especially when you're dealing with a resale. Additional earnest money, again, that's if the buyer only has $500 available now, but they'll have the other 2,700, after closing, then that's where we would address that here. All of the same terms there, put in the amount, the particular day delivered on or before on this one, make it a date. You can make it a term back in paragraph 1D, but a date is better here. Same term and all of the same things that you have to fill in there. Then the total amount financed by the buyer. So I know this is not a really intuitive way. It does kind of start to make sense after you've done a few of them, and I should have figured this, so give me just a second here. Oops. Ah, sorry, folks. But I guess I'll tell you what I'm doing here. So let's say that our buyer is a 90% buyer. They've got a 10% down payment. What I'm figuring here on line 196 is the sale price times the 90%, the amount financed, and that's very clear there. There it is. So that means that our buyer is borrowing 288. And again, I know it's not really intuitive, but you're going to put the 288 in here. And so, as I said earlier, using the one with calculations helps a little bit, but not a whole lot. And put your cents in there also. Did I put my cents in? Up here, I did. Okay. Because here's why. Hold on. What did I do? Well, that's not right. What did I do wrong? I didn't do anything wrong. Oh, all right. I need to figure out what's going on here because using the use using this form, this should figure here for me. Let me tell me if you see something wrong. I've got my purchase price of 320,000. I've got my earnest deposit of $3,200. The amount financed of 288,000. This should be then my down payment. Anybody see that I've done anything wrong there? Why it should be figured? Huh.
So is your down payment the 10% minus the 3,200?
Yes.
Because
Th-
yeah,
And that's what should be showing there.
yeah.
So it should, yeah. I don't have anything. Tell me, because what I'm seeing here, I don't have anything entered incorrectly.
Is it the 10% or the
What's
1%?
I'm sorry, what, Martha? Say that again.
For the earnest money, it's 1% or 10%.
1%.
Okay.
and so your 320,000 minus your 3,200 is your 316,800. For some reason, your 316,800 is just removing the 320,000. That's how it's getting that. So it's taken 320,000 minus 3,200 to get your 316 for that one, but it
But it
should.
should also be taking, but it should also be taking out the,
So where are we
oh, wait,
putting?
oh, hold on. Never mind.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're not putting the. Yeah,
I just hadn't clicked on the form yet. Oh my gosh, sorry about that.
I
Okay.
was gonna say it should be 28. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, now it's got the right thing in there. I just hadn't clicked on the form. But okay, so what it is figured here then is, because I know this question comes up a lot, is why is that number there? So it's our sale price, and it tells you right down here how this is all figured. Purchase price less B, C, and D of this paragraph. So it's taking our purchase price minus what we are putting as the earnest money, so 1% there. Then we tell it, well, and this is the loan that the buyer's getting because, and this is where using the one, the calculations doesn't do you a whole lot of good because you got to figure that one anyway. And then once you click on the form, Linda, then this tells basically what the buyer has to bring to the table for their down payment. It does not include anything about any closing costs. We talk about that in the next part of this paragraph, but nothing about the closing costs. This is just their down payment. And so what this is reflecting is their down payment, assuming that they're going to get their earnest deposit back as part of their down payment at the closing table. So if you're at, so it's really what you come up with here is the buyer's down payment minus the earnest deposit, the way they've got it figured here. And the reason that I suggest that you go ahead and please put your commas in, because on this line and anything down in this paragraph that it figures also, it's going to put your commas in for you to mark the thousands places, and it automatically adds the cents in there. And the reason that I think that's important is, number one, it just looks better. And number two, I know that there are agents out there in the world, because we've got a couple of them in our brokerage, that when they are receiving offers from a buyer on their listing, they will look at those kinds of details and make their judgment about the agent writing the offer based on those kinds of details. So it just again helps put you and your buyer in the best possible light when the other agent and the seller are looking at your offer. All right, and then I'm going to get through this page and then we'll take our break. All right, so seller compensation to broker assisting the buyer. This is where you would put in what you're going to ask the seller to pay of your commission, the buyer's agent's commission. So typically that's going to be whatever is on, I'm not going to say always 3% because it's going to be whatever is on your buyer agency agreement. You cannot accept more from the seller than your buyer agency agreement says. So if you're giving this buyer a break because you're related to them or because you know that they're short on cash and have to make, you know, some adjustments and contracts have to make lower offers. So whatever is on your listing agreement. Now, most of the time I'm seeing most of you on your buyer agency agreements putting in the 495 plus the 3%. So whatever's on your buyer agency agreement is that percentage. You can also ask for the 495, but chances are it's not going to do you any good. So I just really kind of tell agents, you know, don't even bother. Let the buyer know that's something they're going to have to pay or you waive it because I have yet to see a seller agree to pay the anything over the 3% on any offer. So, and I've seen a lot of offers come through, and a lot of times agents have tried. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you attempting it, but just don't expect it. Then the additional seller paid closing costs. This is where we would add the additional, and the reason it says total additional seller expenses is because there are things throughout the contract that the seller is already agreeing to pay for. There, unless changed by other terms, they're agreeing to pay for any termite treatment required. They're agreeing to pay for the title work and the title policy. So that's why the word additional is here. This is why you need to do the buyer's estimated closing costs so that you know how much the buyer will be expected to bring to the table to pay for their closing costs. And if they don't have the money or would rather save that money for repairs to the property or whatever, this is where we ask the seller to pay it. You don't know how much to ask for here unless you've done the estimated closing cost worksheet. All right. Costs not payable by buyer. We're not going to get into that because it doesn't really apply anymore. And so again, all of that is going to be totaled on this, the form making calculations. It's all going to be totaled here on line 218. And it will put in the commas and cents down here as well. So that's why I suggest that you all do it. So buyer's initials down at the bottom of that page, and it is 2:59. So let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. I got to go warm up my coffee. And so I will see you all back here in 5 minutes. Okay, we're back. Didn't see any chat, so you all know to interrupt me if you have any questions or put them in the chat. All right, on page 5, we have our closing and possession date. So we talked with our buyer about what date they wanted to close. Make sure that you are not using any weekends or holidays. Monday is a holiday. Closing dates. Closing, everybody likes to close on Friday, so that they can then move on over the weekend. But remember that, yeah, you can do that. But remember the title company, since everybody likes to close on Fridays, title companies sometimes get very busy on Fridays, and especially the last Friday of the month. So just bear all of that in mind. Since it is a vacant property, we can leave the possession date on line 253 blank, and that's the best thing to do. We can take possession as soon as the closing has happened, meaning that the funds are available. Don't give the keys to the buyer until you know that the transaction has funded. If it's a cash transaction, that's immediate. You can give it to them at closing. If it is a financed sale, the buyer cannot take possession until it's funded. Really important there. The appraisal value contingency, if it's a cash sale, we address this if the buyer wants to get their appraisal. Otherwise, the appraisal is part of the agreement if the buyer's getting a financed loan to buy the property. We have our dates here for the final appraised value. If the appraised value comes in less than the sale price, then we have this whole paragraph that deals with what the parties can do. If that happens, if the appraisal is lower than the sale price, the buyer has 5 days to get their request to the seller. Send them a copy of the appraisal and say, here's what I want to do. We can renegotiate the price, or if the buyer has already said that that has already put in the appraisal waiver, then we don't deal with that. But if this can become a situation, it has become a situation in the past. So again, for the most part, leaving these as 5 days is plenty of time. Any of that though, if we do need extra time for things, can be renegotiated at that time. If there's no reason to not get the seller the appraisal and your request within 5 days, but if we need a longer period of that than that to renegotiate, if we are asking the appraiser to reconsider the appraisal, we might need a couple of extra days for that, and so we can renegotiate the appraisal negotiation period at that time. So no reason to change that as you're making the offer. The sale contingency paragraph on this page. Contract is or is not contingent upon the sale and or closing of the buyer's current property. Have to check one of those 2 boxes. Then if the buyer is getting a loan, this is where we start making that clear to the seller. We have to check one of these 2 boxes, a cash sale or finance sale. If it's a cash sale, this says that we have 5 days to get proof of funds to the seller. If it's a finance sale, then we fill in the rest of this paragraph. The loan application here, if the buyer can change the type of loan because we're going to be telling the seller down here what kind of loan the buyer's getting. They can change the type of loan as long as, and this is all right here, as long as it doesn't result in any additional cost to the seller, delay the closing day, or change the loan approval time frame. Again, only if you think that your buyer is going to be doing that would you need to address this paragraph. And if you think your buyer is going to be doing that, that's really a conversation to have with the buyer and the listing agent. So we're not going to deal with that on this particular offer. On line 311, the type of financing is going to be owner occupied or an investment. One of these 2 boxes has to be checked. Whenever you see boxes on a document, it usually has to be addressed. So one of those two has to be checked there. Ours will be an owner occupied loan. And then
But
here's, huh?
I have a question. What difference does it make, owner occupied or an investment loan? It's still money. I mean,
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Douglas. Usually the lender requirements, that's why we are that's why we address it here. So two things, an owner occupied loan, the appraisal may come up with more items that the appraiser and then therefore the underwriter want repaired before closing. An investment loan will rarely have any kind of repair or appraisal requirements. On the flip side of that, an investment loan is harder to get. Usually more down payment, a little more scrutiny on the property itself as far as the income producing capability of it. So so an investment loan, the two loans have different underwriting requirements. And so that's why we're telling the seller. That's a good question. Okay. All right, so then down here in subparagraph B, we're telling the seller what kind of loan we're getting. And again, the reason for that disclosure is because of the requirements and timeframes that may be required here. Conventional, and especially if it's a 20 or more % down payment, can close pretty quickly. FHA, VA, and USDA have different underwriting requirements, could have more appraisal requirements, and can take a longer period of time to close. Are we allowing enough time in the contract for that? And those are all considerations that for the seller, and especially if they're comparing offers, but at any point in time. Other here would be if there's some kind of hard money, or if they're not going through a conventional lender to get any kind of loan, but some kind of hard money, an REIT or a private investor, that's where we would show that. The type of interest, how the interest is being paid. And again, because of the underwriting requirements here. Most of the time, you're going to be filling in one of these for conventional FHA, VA, or USDA. There is owner financing there too, but again, that needs to be a conversation prior to writing the offer if the seller can and will consider seller financing. But the fixed rate, adjustable rate, interest only because of the underwriting requirements there. Most of the time, the interest only is going to be on investment properties. The fixed rate or adjustable rate, again, because of the underwriting requirements and differences there, we're letting the seller know. Adjustable rates, we're seeing those as interest rates are volatile and kind of moving up. We see a lot of adjustable rate mortgages coming into the market. Please, please, please fill in 329 and 330, the amortization period, and you'll get that information off of the pre-approval letter. Is it a 15-year note? Is it a 20-year note? Is it a 30-year note? That's what we're looking for in there. And then the principal amount or loan to value, I suggest you put in the LTV, the loan to value. And using the example that I used before, 10% down payment, then our loan to value shows as a ratio here, and it would be 90/10. Or if it were an FHA with a minimum down payment, 96.5/3.5. So put that in there. I suggest you do that because if you put in the principal amount, which you can do, but there's any renegotiation on the contract, you have to remember on the counter offer that that has to be changed, that has to be addressed and changed as well. Loan to value is probably not going to change. If it does, you have to address it. The interest rate as follows, the primary loan, and again, I did primary versus secondary loan, we're always using the primary loan. Secondary loan's a whole special thing. You'll probably recognize it when you get there if you're put in that position. But interest rate not exceeding, would be when the buyer has to cap the interest rate at times when the interest rates are volatile and changing a lot, and especially going up. That's going to affect probably the buyer's ability to buy at any particular price point. So checking this protects the buyer. It weakens your offer a little bit, but it protects the buyer. The prevailing rate at closing means that regardless of what interest rates are doing, and what the interest rate would be on closing day, the buyer can qualify for that and will get the loan for that. So again, strengthens your offer, but doesn't protect your buyer quite as much. Line 353, please, 100% of the time, check this because you shouldn't be out showing properties to a buyer that doesn't have a pre-approval letter. On line 354, you are identifying the lending institution at the very least. That's really what this line is asking for. It is great for you to go ahead and put in the loan officer's name and phone number because that's right there. That will be on the pre-approval letter anyway, but the lending institution is what we're looking for here because listing agents and sellers can make their decisions based upon where the buyer's getting their loan. All of this information is pertinent to the seller's preferences and how they want to proceed. The seller can always ask if using ABC Lending, ABC Mortgage, the company that I have on everyone's scenario here. If the seller has had a bad experience or the listing agent's had a bad experience with ABC, but everything else and the offer seems to be okay, seller can always make the contingency that the buyer get a pre-approval from someone else and not use that lender. So that's why that's an important. On line 361, again, you should not be showing any properties for which you do not have a pre-approval letter. So shouldn't be checking that box. Usually there's nothing to change in here. And this is, kind of then, Linda's hot button about a lot of agents will go ahead and fill in the 45 days here, the 5 days here. Please don't change this because this is what protects your buyer. It's giving them plenty of time to get through the underwriting process, that they've made their application and getting through the process here. So please don't change anything here. There's really no reason to. But a lot of agents will put in the default here. And again, what I'm thinking is, well, if you put the defaults in here, but you didn't put anything back up here in the appraisal paragraph, to me that means you're picking and choosing what you think are the important paragraphs. And they're all important, right? Or if you didn't put the default back in the appraisal paragraph and you did here, does that mean that, well, you really meant to change something here? And again, you put the mindless 45 because that's what's printed there. So again, if you're using the default period, Linda's preferences, and you don't put anything in there, just let it stand. The lender appraisal requirements, there is something done here. And so again, once again, this is one that if people have put in the 45 and 5 up here as the defaults and they leave this one blank, this is maybe even more important than that other paragraph, even though they're all important. Lender appraisal requirements here, I don't see this one used very often, but if we were getting an FHA loan on this property and we saw that there was peeling paint or we saw that there was a staircase that didn't have a handrail, we're going to want to make sure that the seller addresses those. Our estimate of what those repairs might cost would be what we put in here. I don't see agents using this very often. I like the fact that it's in here. And again, it kind of puts the responsibility of us coming up with estimates on here and guessing at what that might be. But if we leave it at 0, that means that the seller says, if that appraisal comes back and says, well, handrails need to be installed and splash blocks need to be put at the end of downspouts, seller can say, nope, not going to do that. If we have $500 in here, then $500 would cover those 2 repairs. So the seller's obligated. So if you want to put something in there, talk about it with your coach and with me or your broker, because it certainly can be used. It's there. I just don't see it used very often. Again, we're just going through the mechanics of filling this out. So we're not going to talk about what all of those paragraphs are about, not that they're not important. Paragraph number 13, line 462, is where we put in our days allowed for inspection, for the inspection period. The default here is 10. In most cases, 10 is plenty, but bear in mind that it will include 2 weekends. You're not going to get any inspectors out on Sunday. Some whole house inspectors will work on Saturday, but if you're wanting a secondary one, an HVAC inspector, special, or a roof inspector to come back out and look at the roof, you're not going to get them to work on Saturdays. So bear that in mind. If you think that you're going to want extra time, now's the time to ask for it. It's very common for me and most offers that I write, unless I know I'm in competition with other offers, I actually will put in 12 to 14 days in here. It becomes a negotiable term. And I always then stress that, well, yes, we're going to try to get everything done as early as possible. That's just covering for weekends and if something should come up later. Of course, we're going to try to get our inspections done as soon as possible. So, and again, be mindful of any holidays that are in there too, as well as weekends. I see a lot of people trying to use this sub paragraph 2, line 513, adding in specialty inspections, but that's not what this is for. Just about any inspection that you could think of is included in this list up here, starting on line 466. Including lead-based paint testing, which nobody ever does. The box down here on line 513 is all about the wood destroying insects report. And I did see on a lot of the offers coming through on the contract challenge, there's a detached garage on the property. I didn't measure it. I don't have any idea whether it's 30 feet or not, or 30 feet within 30 feet of the primary residence or further than that. I don't know, but because back up here in this paragraph, it says everything within the primary residence, primary structure, and anything within 30 feet is going to be inspected. If there's something outside of that that you want inspected, that's what this box is for, is to name that item. So the detached garage. If there's a freestanding deck or gazebo out in the yard, put that in there. Sometimes we want the fencing. A lot of sellers will kind of balk at that, but if it's a wooden fence, wooden fences are not typically part of the wood destroying insect report. But if you want it included, that's what you would put in here. So that's what this paragraph is all about. Any additional structures or items to be included in the wood destroying insect report. This paragraph, subparagraph J, paragraph 13, what is not an unacceptable condition? The seller's disclosure is going to show certain things that the seller says right off the bat. That's one of the ways that they can signify, designate on page 7 is yes, I'll just go ahead and use the furnace. The furnace is 25 years old. It's working right now, but you can't use that. And so they have marked it EX on the seller's disclosure. The buyer cannot use that as an unacceptable condition. Go ahead and have it inspected, but you can't cancel the contract based on the fact that the furnace needs work. All right, or I'm not going to do any repairs or replacement of the furnace. So a lot of that stuff is marked on the seller's disclosure. Another reason for you to be looking that over carefully, page 7, to let the buyer know all of that. Rarely would you add anything here in the offer. You don't have to, if the sellers put EX next to the furnace on the seller's disclosure, you don't have to put it on here because the seller's disclosure governs anyway. So rarely would you add anything in here unless, of course, you are trying to make your offer more attractive to the seller if you know you're in competition and you can put it, then you could add things in here. Most of the time, this is something that becomes negotiated throughout the negotiations of the price. The seller may say, well, I'll accept your low offer. However, I'm going to make the dishwasher and the stove because they're both old. And if neither one of them work, I'm not going to do any repair. So I'm going to add that in here. So this is usually a paragraph that we refer to in further negotiations. Rarely would you put something in here as you're writing the offer, but you could. The resolution of unacceptable conditions paragraph here, our renegotiation period, as we call it. Once your buyer has done their inspections, you send your inspection notice, and if you're sending a resolution, if you either want the seller to address some repairs or you want the seller to address some of the financial items, we can renegotiate the price. We can ask the seller to pay either some or now additional buyer closing costs, as long as it fits within the lender's framework of the type of loan. So all of that's addressed on the resolution of unacceptable conditions. Any or all of those. You can ask for repairs and some financial concessions. So that's a whole different class that we talk about that specifically. I'd also then usually suggest that you can increase this as you're making the offer. If you're pretty sure that you're going to be making some requests for repairs here or reconsideration of the financials of the contract, no reason to not go ahead and, say, hey, we may need more than 5 days, because once again, if there's a weekend involved in there, we're not going to be able to get bids on work or get secondary inspectors out. So putting 7 days in here as you're making the offer, nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with leaving it blank at 5 days too, but sometimes I do just go ahead and suggest, well, let's just go ahead and extend that to begin with. That way we don't have to remember to do it in the heat of the renegotiation period. Again, not that it's not important, but we're just talking about the mechanics of filling in things here today. On page 13, this one tends to throw especially new agents off too, even though I've seen experienced agents have problems with this. Both Kansas and Missouri require that the relationships between the buyers, sellers, and the licensees is all disclosed clearly in the contract. It has to be disclosed before signing of the contract. So that's why it's here on page 13. You will always find, and we have, and as the licensee writing the offer, we have to fill in everything. We are the ones that have to complete it. You can't ask your buyer to sign something that's not complete. So we are also then filling in the information about the licensee assisting the seller. Going back here to MLS, I can make that a little bigger for you all. Back here in this middle, kind of in the middle of the MLS info sheet, we have our listing information here. So we have Warren Smith named as the agent there. We also, here is LACAP, that stands for Listing Agent Capacity. He is telling us that he is the designated seller's agent. You will occasionally see one that says seller's agent in here. And if so, that is an indication that this licensee is the supervising broker of their brokerage. That's the only time that you should see that. If you see seller's agent here, make sure you are double checking that information with the listing agent. You may also on occasion see transaction broker here, because there are some brokerages out here in the Kansas City metro area that work as transaction brokers and never represent anyone. So whatever's here, make sure you are looking here on MLS to see how the agent has designated themselves, and that's what you're going to copy on over here. So again, 99% of the time it's going to be designated seller's agent. The licensee assisting the seller is the designated seller's agent. You are always, 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 always the designated buyer's agent. The only times that you would not be the designated buyer's agent is if you are working as a limited agent or transaction broker for the buyer. You are not representing them. We hope that that's not what you're doing. Even if you have a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement, you're still the designated buyer's agent. It's only if you are working not representing the buyer that you would not choose designated buyer's agent. You are never the buyer's agent, ever. So that's that. There are no exceptions to that until much, much later on in your career. Some of these other boxes could be checked. If you are working as a as a transaction broker, not representing your buyer and certainly not representing the seller, then you are working as a transaction broker. You would check that, and you would say down here, buyer's not being represented. If that's the case, if you are working with a buyer that you're not representing and any seller, then that's what you would check. If you're working with an unrepresented buyer and an unrepresented seller, such as a for sale by owner, then you would be checking both transaction broker boxes here and that neither buyer nor seller is being represented. But 99% of the time it's going to be you're checking whatever the listing agent on MLS has shown and the designated buyer's agent for you. If you are showing a for sale by owner, you are the licensee assisting the seller. You're not representing them. You're still probably representing the buyer. But so as a working as a buyer, as a buyer's agent, designated buyer's agent, working with an unrepresented seller, you're going to be checking over here that you are the licensee assisting the seller as a designated buyer's agent and that the seller's not being represented. So it gets kind of confusing there, except for, again, 99% of the time, you're looking at what MLS says about the listing agent and you are the designated buyer's agent. This line down here in line 719 also tends to throw some people sometimes. Brokers are compensated by. Most of the time, you're going to be checking both boxes. If you're asking the seller to pay your compensation, then we know that the seller's compensating some of the brokers, so you would check that. And again, most of the time is going to be your buyer paying your $495. So both boxes are checked. Even if your buyer is paying their own compensation to you, that they're not going to ask the seller to pay your compensation, I would still check the box that broker compensated by seller because we don't know what the relationship is between the listing agent and the seller, but chances are seller's paying that listing agent as well. So again, 99.9% of the time, you're going to check both boxes here. Rare occasion that you might not check one or the other, but that very special circumstances on that. Everyone signs page 13. You sign as the licensee assisting the buyer. As you're filling this out, go ahead and sign this here. Everything that you need to sign that you send to a client, you need to sign first. Your buyer agency agreement, your listing agreements, anything that requires your signature, the estimated closing cost worksheet, excuse me, you sign before you send it to the buyer. So you will be signing here on line 723. Your buyers will be signing this page also as part of their signatures of the contract, not only initialing every page, but signing page 13. It says right above here on line 721, the signatures below only apply to the brokerage relationship disclosure. We have to have everyone's acknowledgement of this information. If the sellers are going to make a counter offer to our offer, they still will sign page 13 and initial all of the pages to the contract. Again, their acknowledgement that they have seen all of this information, acknowledge all of this information, but they're going to be making some changes to some of the terms, but they still will sign here. And the licensee assisting the seller. So you leave that for the licensee assisting the seller to do. That's, again, that's one reason why I don't autofill any of my contracts, and you'll see that when you do see autofill, when you do use autofill, that it will automatically insert the listing agent's name in there and the seller's names in there. And it's just because sometimes those things can change. So that's why I don't use autofill. But you'll see if you use autofill and you've assigned people, all of the people to the loop, that their names will show up in there. Your buyer's names and your name should show up in here. That's the best and easiest way for you to take care of that. The paragraphs here, all about what happens to the earnest money and the tax prorations here. The last box that we fill in here is our expiration date. Our expiration date The contract allows 5 days, and 5 days is too long for an offer to be hanging out there. Yes, your buyer can always retract the offer within that period of time, anytime before acknowledgement of acceptance, communication of acceptance. They can retract their offer. You will occasionally need to leave this at the 5 days if you're dealing with some kind of corporate listing, either a bank foreclosure where you're dealing with the lender or an investor or a corporate listing of some kind, and they don't work weekends, and it usually has to go. Sometimes those do take the 5 days. On our example here, it's an in-town seller because we verified that with the listing agent. 24 to 48 hours here is what I would put in. The only other time that you might that the buyer might allow for more than the 48 hours up to the 5 days would be if the seller it knows that they're already knows or is expecting to get multiple offers, and they're not going to give any answer until Saturday at 7. And you know that, and your buyer is willing to kind of wait that out, or at least give the impression that they're willing to wait that out, then you could leave that at 5 days. But typically speaking, 5 days is too long. So filling out the bottom on page 16 of our 16-page contract. So you do not sign the contract because you are not a party to the contract. You sign line page 13 because you are the one acknowledging the disclosure of the brokerage relationships. But all buyers have to sign here. You will be filling in your information, your brokerage information, brokerage address, your name here, your phone number, the brokerage phone number, and your email address. This is all as a courtesy to the lender, the title company, and the other agent. And because it's a courtesy to all of those people, please, 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 again, because it not only puts you and your buyer in a better light and a good light, but it also is a benefit to all of those other people. From the listing, you will fill in all of the listing agent's information, all of that same information, the brokerage name, the brokerage address, their name, their phone number, their brokerage phone number, and their email address. Going back over to MLS, you'll find all of that information here. Sorry, all of that information here. So you would put Warren's name and the licensee assisting the seller. You would put KW Kansas City Metro as the brokerage, and then to get their address, it's because you should know it since it's ours. But if it were a Remax, you click on that, and that gives you the address up here and the brokerage phone number. So all of that information is readily available to you on MLS.
Linda, did I see where it needed the selling agent's license number on that same page, or was I looking at something wrong?
They don't ask for that here anymore. They do on the commercial, but we don't ask for license number anymore on here.
Okay.
Okay. All right. And so your buyer signs this. Now you're ready to send this and all of the other things over with your offer. A couple of other things for me to address here on this. So once you have sent it, back up just a minute. So you've sent it to your buyer and they've initialed and signed everywhere that they're supposed to. Then and only then do you come back and sign on line 882. This box here, form certification, if you read it, says that you are certifying by signing that line 882, you are certifying that no one has made any changes to the contract other than what's acknowledged in the contract. You may have put in some things and some blanks, but nobody's made any other changes. You haven't crossed out anything. You haven't added any additional terms that aren't acknowledged within the appropriate blanks in there. You can only certify that once you've gotten it back from your buyer signed. If they try to make any changes to it, because when you send it to them, you send it to them that they can sign only. They don't have editing ability on this. And then another reason for you to sign page 13, if they try to make any changes to it, you will be notified of that. Number one, it will erase your signature on page 13, and it will tell them, hey, you don't have the ability to edit here. It will tell you someone's trying to edit the form. So you can certify once you've gotten it back from the buyer that nobody made any changes to it other than those acknowledged by all parties. So then you sign line 882. That's when you are ready to send it over to the other agent. Should have backed up there on that one. If the seller is going to make a counter offer, the seller will be initialing every page. They will sign page 13 and that disclosure, and then this box needs to be checked. That will be, you have to, I think, I need to double check with Brett on this. I never write down my questions for him, but I think that we have to make a PDF to do that because I think even checking that box would erase any signatures that are already on there. So have to make a PDF, add a check box and a check mark there that the seller is not going to be signing this because they are presenting a counteroffer. And it says that pretty plainly right there. All right, so there's that. The very last thing on page 16 of our 16-page contract here, certification of rejection. There are certainly times that you would ask for this. There are also times when you can just provide it. Now we're talking from the seller's point of view, just providing it, but from the listing agent's point of view. If you have an idea that your offer was never presented, if there's any concern that your offer was never presented to the seller, the listing agent just came back and said, no, the seller's rejecting your offer, always ask, and it was presented. The listing agent should not be offended by that question. Some of them might be, but they shouldn't be. They also should not be offended if you say, oh, well, then would you please fill out the certification of rejection at the bottom of the contract? Again, we're not asking the seller to sign this, but this is if the seller just is not going to make a counteroffer, if they're just rejecting your offer. We're not asking the seller to sign it, but we are asking the listing or the licensee assisting the seller to sign it. They can't lie. They're not supposed to lie to us. So by them signing this, saying when the presentation was made to the seller and they're signing it, that is their verification that it was presented to the seller. If anything should ever come up later, that can become a problem for us. If your seller has received an offer that again, now we're flipping over. I know most of the time we're talking from the buyer's point of view here, but if your seller is rejecting an offer outright and really don't want any other offers from that buyer, this is a really good way to indicate that. So there are times when you just go at it from the listing agent's point of view and the seller's point of view, you go ahead and the listing agent signs that and sends it back. You can do it on any time because that really is evidence that it was presented and they accepted another offer or just don't like the terms of this one and not going to make a counter offer. Lots of times when it's a really, really low offer, low ball offer, that's the way the seller feels. So, all right, that's it, folks. We've gone through the mechanics. I don't see any chats in here. Does anybody have any questions about this or anything else? Because I've got a few minutes. I'll let you go early if we don't have any questions, but really good time for you to ask any questions or make any comments that you'd like to. Any discussion? Nothing. I've written down everyone's name. So again, because I don't have the QR code with me, I need to make a copy of that and bring it and leave it at home here for me. But I've got everybody's name here that you all attended. Oh, Martha. Okay. None for me. I appreciate the information. Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here. This is a good group. It does my heart good that you all show up for these. Some of you for multiple times, and I really do appreciate that. I do try to hit. I loved it. Thank you. Thank you too, Vicky. And you were able to stay for the whole thing. So good. I know you're going to be late to the celebration tonight and only on Zoom, but we'll see you then too. It just does my heart good that people try to come back and see these multiple times because I do try to hit something new every time. Sometimes it's not possible, but glad to see all of you here. Well, I'm done with you all. I hope to see everyone either in person or at least on Zoom tonight, those of you that can make it, because it is a good celebration of all of you and all of the hard work that you all have put in this year. So I won't be there in person. So hope to see you all then. Otherwise, thanks, Jeff. No other questions.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, Elena. We will see you later.